Okay, so we have 4 speakers with us today who are also our 2020 GSMI mentors. We have Yessica, we have Yael, we have Kamir, and we have Steven. So would you guys like to briefly introduce yourselves, where you are currently at in your STEM professional careers, what you study, and where you're currently based? And we can start from the order of the photos.
Cool. Yeah. So hi, everyone. My name is Yessica. I am a current first-year neuroscience PhD student at Oregon Health and Science University. I worked with Científico Latino for quite a while. I'm the resource development director and one of the STEM education and outreach fellows. And yeah, I'm pretty excited to talk about how my first year is going, especially through COVID. I mean, now it's sort of getting better, and maybe if some of you are going into your first year, it won't be as dampened as my year has been, but I'm assuming a lot of the stuff that I've experienced is hopefully relevant for your guys' year.
Hi, I'm Yael. I'm a second-year neuroscience PhD candidate at Harvard, and I'm super excited to talk to you guys about the first year of grad school today. Most of my first year was pre-pandemic. It kind of hit in March as I was finishing up my second rotation, so I kind of have an interesting perspective where 2/3 of my first year was normal, and then 1/3 of it was pandemic.
Hi, I'm Kamir. I'm a new postdoc at Stanford in immunology, and I just finished my PhD from UCSF in the biomedical sciences program last year. And I've been trying to help people apply to grad school through Científico Latino for the past 2 years, which is an awesome program.
Hi, my name is Stephen Conklin López. I am also a postdoctoral fellow, a clinical chemistry postdoctoral fellow at Johns Hopkins University. And I guess, well, yeah, I'm one of the mentors in the Científico Latino as well. And I guess this is my first year being a mentor. And if you guys, whoever's participating would like to participate and become a mentor, that would definitely benefit all of us, because I know I enjoyed it a lot. I'm sure that all the other mentors enjoyed it as well.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Alrighty. So today for this webinar, our last GSMI webinar, we're going to be touching base on, 4 very general but very important topics related to graduate school. So first being choosing a lab and rotations. This is more so geared for, I guess, PhD programs in the biosciences. The second one being social life. What is it like to be a graduate student, right? Outside of lab and in lab. Third one being mentorship. Fourth being finances and financial support. And as promised, right? So the second half being the general Q&A session where we will address and answer all of your questions. So feel free, please feel free to submit them along, as we progress throughout the webinar in the Q&A panel. So the first topic, choosing a lab. So how do you guys test out different professors and labs to understand their workflow?
Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you. So for me, I had to sit myself down and ask myself in what situations I work best in. And this was kind of like a rough analysis of myself. I mean, no one really likes to self-reflect and stuff, but I knew that that I needed to work with someone who had an open door policy, but isn't necessarily super hands-on. So I needed to find a good balance between that. And so that kind of ruled out labs that pretty much the PI is kind of not available, and kind of requires students to be completely self-autonomous, which is perfect for some people, but it wasn't great for me. That's just an example of the thought process that I kind of took upon myself. I just thought about, in what previous situations was I the most happiest in my work environment, and how can I like apply that to the labs that I'm most interested in for this PhD program.
Anyone else want to add to that, or?
I think you're muted, Stephen.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just to just repeat what Jessica mentioned, like you have to try to find what works best for you. And what Jessica alluded to was like, do you work best like in a hands-on or hands-off approach, right? Some work very well with having a PI that is constantly in the lab asking questions and being more interactive with you. Others like the approach that, well, the PI is there and lets me do whatever I want or lets me be independent, and that does make a difference. It can make you or break you, to be honest. And I guess because this is a question of like, right, like how are you trying to test your professors' labs and trying to understand what their workflow is. I think I would also talk to the students, the grad students and postdocs. They work there every day. The PI doesn't. So they have all the insight that you might want to get. So make sure to talk to them, shadow them. I'm not sure, depending on the program that you are, you might actually do research. Some is just shadowing, depends. And also another thing to keep in mind is go to the group meetings and pay attention to lab interactions and the group meetings themselves. They are quite telling, I can say. Like for instance, right before we started, we were talking about group meetings, and I remember one of my experiences was with a group meeting that were on Fridays. We would start like around 8:30 in the morning, and they would not end. The group meeting would end around 4 p.m. So it's like a whole deal, whole experience, or a whole whole, I don't know, awful experience. That's all I have to say. But it does tell a lot, and try to understand, like try to talk to people, to the grad students, to see if the PI is also approachable. Some PIs are approachable, some PIs are present, some are absent. And those are the things I would definitely keep in mind when choosing a lab or when like probing a lab.
I would say that there were a few things that I knew I wanted up front. So before I would agree to rotate, I would ask the PI how they approach these things. Like I knew I wanted to meet one-on-one with my PI once a week, like at least, probably like once a week. So I'd ask, how often do you meet with rotation students? And then once they join your lab, how often do you meet? And are you willing to meet with me once a week? And things like that. And what hours do you expect students to work? Is it okay if I work 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. if that's what's optimal for me and I'm getting everything done? And so those things I had to do up front. And then some questions I didn't know up front, like I didn't know if I wanted a big lab or a small lab. So I sought diversity in my rotations. So I rotated in like a big lab, small lab, and then kind of within small labs, like a brand new lab versus like a 10-year-old lab where the PI just kept it small on purpose. So I really tried to make my rotations different so I could figure out which one I meshed with the best.
Mm-hmm.
I really agree with directly asking the PIs before. I mean, it's very easy to ask them before you commit to an entire rotation, like exactly how they approach mentorship. But then you should also potentially ask the people in the lab if that's really how it actually occurs. And then also for newer labs, that process can change a lot over time. Like I was my PI's first grad student, and things changed a lot over 4 or 5 years. So you can also ask them how they predict things might happen in the future. They may be completely wrong, but just based on how they perceive they want to try and do things can at least tell you where their interests lie. And also just one other point is that this relationship between your PI, but also maybe not as much mentioned yet, the other like postdocs and senior grad students, especially in the lab, these relationships may really should be more important than the science. You don't want to choose a place that's actually like not great for you just because you think the science is amazing and then end up having a pretty horrible time for many, many years. I think it's easier to fall in love with a new little area of science being in a supportive and nice community rather than trying to improve your relationships in a more toxic environment just because you love the science. So this is super important.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything you four have just said. We actually just received a question related to what you just mentioned, Kamir, about testing out, the newer labs. So what are some of the pros and cons of working with a tenured versus non-tenured professors? Yeah.
I guess like the two extremes would be like a very senior PI where you're probably most likely going to be more directly mentored by people inside the lab rather than the PI directly, which can almost end up like being mentored by a young PI, and maybe even more hands-on. I don't know. It really is so variable. I guess within a large lab, there should be another person or another few people that can really help you. Otherwise, it's going to be a really different experience. And I guess the scientific freedom that you get in a lab that is like extremely well funded and can also potentially have the name recognition to facilitate collaborations and even like name recognition on papers when they're submitted to big journals can unfortunately be a leg up. Not that that's necessarily equitable. So you do get advantages in labs like that, but you really have to think if it's a supportive environment around you. And in a young lab, you can't accurately predict what's going to happen in the next few years. So it's a bit of a risk, but you also can then yourself have a hand in shaping the culture of the lab and how the lab grows, which is also interesting. So like Yael said, like rotating through different labs, I think is a great idea to see which type of environments you actually would like.
Yeah, I think for me, a brand new lab was a little too much. The word micromanaging has a negative connotation, and the person I rotated with was not a negative person at all, nor controlling, but they were just so necessarily involved in every day-to-day thing that happened in the lab, and it was too much for me. I needed a lab that's a little more established. So kind of my PI now is like in her office working and very happy to take all our questions, help with the nitty-gritty details of our experiments, but is not like elbows deep in the experiment next to you, like asking, oh, how many microliters did you pipette and did you switch tips? And like, all right, like I needed a little more space than the brand new lab could give me.
Definitely, yeah. I also want to add one more thing about maybe like a pro, working in, someone who is very new to the department. I personally know a friend of mine, she definitely wanted to join like one of the newer labs where the PI is more young because she has plans to also start her own lab, right? So she's on a very academic path. So if you are definite about, academia being the path for you and you want to understand the inner workings of how to, right, like start a lab from the ground up, that would definitely also be a pro to working with, I guess, more a non-tenured assistant professor. Yeah. So yeah, Stephen?
I guess I was going to add, and I guess this is playing a little bit of devil's advocate, and Kamir, like he mentioned, that there's a risk at participating or being a part of a new laboratory. It's either tenure-wise, right? Like the faculty who's starting is on a track to get tenure, so they will do whatever it takes or do or sacrifice certain things to obtain tenure. Whereas someone who's already established doesn't really need to do that, right? So if you are capable of withstanding high pressure, high stakes situations, maybe a new lab could be your environment. And it doesn't matter, it can translate, the same type of interaction can translate to a more established laboratory. But at least in my experience, the tendency is the younger labs tend to be definitely the tougher environments to be in, because there are a certain set of expectations. And obviously the PI wants to get tenure at the 5th year of their, I guess, track.
Definitely. Yeah. So along the ideas of, testing out, the newer labs or like rotating in, I guess, more of the more established labs, right? We have a next question, right? Which is, who in the lab decides if you are a good fit to join? So with a PI, grad students, postdocs, etc.
I think there's a question in the chat that kind of pertains to the previous question. If you want to talk about, if you all want to talk about it.
Yes, so someone has asked, how long did it take you in your rotation to figure out if that lab could be your home lab for your PhD thesis?
It literally took me like 1 week, honestly. So I have a weird experience with rotations. I'm going through them right now, and I already know which lab I'm going to join. But that's based off the fact that I did a post-bac at the same institution the year before, and we did 2-week rotations. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of forced to train myself to assess whether I wanted to be in that lab. It's just like on the first week, I was just like on hyper vigilance mode. Like I asked myself, do the people in the lab even like each other? How's my dynamic with the PI? The topic of the science itself was kind of like low on the rung because I picked all these labs. I like the science already, but it's harder to navigate your PhD if you're in a lab where you love the science, but you don't really like enjoy the dynamics between your PI and the lab members. I think someone else in the panel said this, than the other way around. It just literally took me like a week. Sometimes you just know. I think the more difficult ones from my colleagues' experiences is when things are kind of ambiguous. But I feel like that's more in the rare end. And I just saw the Q&A. How long are rotations typically? Are they all 2 weeks? Sorry, I should clarify. So the 2-week rotations are for my post-bac program. I was just kind of mentioning that because I needed to learn whether the lab was for me within those 2 weeks. Before the PhD program that I'm in, our rotations are minimum of 8 weeks. They can go up to like 12. However, that's I think every program and every department has different rules. Like I've seen as short as 4 weeks. I've seen as long as 12 weeks. I think on average, it's about 6 to 8. I think other people here can probably elaborate more on that if they want to.
Yeah, so the rules in my program are bare minimum 6 weeks, but very few people only rotate for 6 weeks. That's if you really know it's not the lab you're going to join and there's nothing more you're going to learn from that rotation. So it's pretty rare that people leave after 6. 8 is very normal. My first rotation, I spent 12 weeks in because I had a lot to learn. And I was like learning quite a bit. It was my very first semester. I knew about a month into the 12-week rotation, actually, that it likely wasn't the lab for me. So to answer the original question, it took me about 4 weeks to know for the ones where it wasn't the lab. Because I kept trying to like think about it, like maybe it's not like these little like red flags aren't that bad, like maybe. And then I rotated in the one I did join, and in like a week I was like, oh my god, this is it. But yeah, 6-week minimum, 8-week average, 12-week long.
Does anyone else want to contribute, or we can address the current question?
I guess the only thing I'm gonna add to that, like despite the rotation length, it varies through program, but think of it choosing a lab as you're dating. You know you like the person immediately because it clicks. If it doesn't click and you're second guessing it, that means it's not for you. Just go to the next rotation. And to be honest, there's some programs that stipulate, yeah, you can only have, I don't know how many times you guys rotate, but some are three rotations, some are 4, and some allow you to do more if you ask for it. So if you feel that the 3 or 4 labs that you've rotated in are not for you, you can always request one additional rotation. Obviously, you would want to choose a laboratory because you don't want to prolong your rotation. You want to get back down and dirty and start doing your research and join a
lab. One other thought is that it's pretty amazing to be able to spend almost a year trying things, even though like it's a really long time and like PhD is already really long. I think it can be really fun to like really embrace trying things. I joined a lab that does science that I had no intention of doing in graduate school, and in a new lab, which I had no intention of joining a new lab starting grad school either. So if you're in a situation where like a lab that you do like doesn't have like a lot of competition, sometimes it happens that like a lot of people want to join the same lab and a PI has to like choose. That kind of is unfortunate. But if you have the luxury of like waiting to decide, it'd be good to like wait until you really get through all 3 of your rotations before for sure committing to something. I mean, alternatively, if you really, really like one, you can also do like a technical rotation depending on your program. Some people did that to like already start off with like a collaboration. So they specifically do a final rotation to learn a new technique that they combine with the lab that they want to join. Just enjoy things and explore, I guess, is my point.
100%. Yeah. So I guess like on the flip side of that, right? So what if you do click with the lab, but then the opinions or the feelings aren't mutual, right? So who in the lab then, right, decides if you are essentially like a good fit, or if you who decides whether, Daisy would be a perfect person to join, or I don't know.
So in my lab, the PI makes kind of the main call, but before giving the student an offer, we'll consult the lab and say, I feel this way. Does anyone strongly disagree, and for what reason? And sometimes it will be negative and sometimes it will be positive, but she really gives us space to speak if we feel strongly a different way, if perhaps she didn't get the right impression, but she definitely makes the final call. And that's how she does it.
Awesome.
Yeah, it tends to go that way. Like the grad students, postdocs tend to have a lot of weight on the decision. Obviously, they're going to be the ones, you're entering their territory. So obviously they have a say on who joins or who doesn't join into the lab. That's another reason why I say you should gauge the environment, gauge the interactions, and you'll know if they like you or not. Like they won't take you by surprise. I don't think someone will pretend to like you just because you're rotating. But yes, I think the PI has the ultimate say, but in all reality is grad students, postdocs are the ones that are going to have the say.
I definitely agree with what Stephen has said, like the grad students and postdocs making, making the judgment. And I know that when I actually rotated in like a really big lab, and so the PI like puts a lot of trust in like that grad student mentor who was training me in my rotation. So in a sense, it was also like that grad student I was working with making the final decision because the PI trusts so much in her judgment. But yeah, what Yael and Stevens mentioned, yeah, definitely. The PI makes essentially like the final call decision. Does anyone else want to contribute, or we can just move on to the next question? Yeah. Oof, okay. So this is a heavy one. So how do you introduce conversations about outreach to your potential thesis advisor?
This is a great question because so I should have mentioned this when we talked about like assessing labs and PIs. But one of the questions, well, first off, I know it's nervous to think about like, oh, will the lab like me? Will they accept me? But also you have to equally borderline interrogate the lab/PI yourself. So the PI that I was really interested in, and then the one whose lab I'm joining, I asked him like, I think I asked him something like, do your lab members do any scientific outreach? I think that's your safest question if you're nervous about asking it. If they say, yes, my grad student so-and-so does XYZ, and gives off like all these examples. The more detailed they are with their answer, that's kind of a good sign that they're paying attention. And then I think I asked like more detailed examples of like, oh, what's your experience in doing scientific outreach or diversifying science? And pretty much his answers completely were just great because I wanted to be part of Científico Latino. And since then, I've never had a problem with my PhD advisor, hence why I am joining his lab. But yeah, if you haven't spoken to your advisor about it, I would just go with the whole, do any of your students do scientific outreach? If they do, you should definitely talk to that student or postdoc or whoever is in that lab, and definitely ask them like, how is, like, how do you manage your time between lab and like outreach? Is it doable? Like, does one causes more stress than the other? So on and so forth. Yeah, that's my two cents.
Yeah, I think I approached it a little differently. Before I would even rotate, but also at the beginning of rotation, and then again before I would join, I would say, these are the things I'm passionate about doing. X, Y, Z involvement. So I really like outreach and diversity, but I also like teaching, and I also like scientific communication. And I made it super clear to every PI I rotated with that there are things I am passionate about and I want to devote time to. But I also said, hey, my science is really important to me too. I'll make sure I'm being super productive. Like, I love my project, I love my science. Can we keep an open dialogue to make sure that both of us are content in my scientific progress while I pursue these things? I said, look, I don't want my project to slack either. I know you don't, and I know I don't. So let's just keep an open dialogue. If you're unhappy with my progress, please let me know, but I will be doing these other things. So I really just told them, but I welcomed feedback on if they felt I wasn't performing well enough.
Awesome.
That's awesome how, like, I think it's really important to ask such direct questions. But then they may not always be completely correct, or they might change in the future. So at least one thing that I didn't mention before is that at least in my program, we had a really knowledgeable program coordinator who you could like go talk to and be like, is this PI's lab like any aspect of that lab? And he would often have an answer. I don't know if every PhD program would have this, but that's another opportunity to validate that what you're hearing is indeed correct, or even just like save you time when you're trying to find out what labs would be okay or not okay with this. Another thing you could ask about is and get involved in is like actual or like official outreach programs at your university, like and see if they've had, like, ask if your putative PI has had experiences with like this particular outreach program. Have they like hosted summer undergrads or summer high school students, and how they like that, and like maybe you want to take on a high school student or an undergrad student. I've seen like one lab that took a high school student once, found that the high school student was not productive, which, like, I mean, seems really harsh, and have never taken a high school student again. And like, that's probably something you should look out for. So another sneaky way to try and see how they view these outreach opportunities as being beneficial or not.
Definitely. Great points.
Yeah, I guess another thing you can also, I agree with everything that's been said. I did not take the approach of stating that I wanted to do outreach. I just did it. And if my PI didn't like it, then I would try to go around it. And that's not the appropriate approach, I can say. But I would like to say, like, with regards to what was just said about like hosting like high schoolers or undergrads in your laboratory, that says a lot. And also you can look at the CVs of the PIs. Like, do they have any like mentorship awards and any outreach awards, or are they involved in certain, I don't know, activities or societies? Like, you can also stalk them on Twitter or something like that and see what are they posting. Are they posting something that is worth your time or not? Or does it go with what you want to do and achieve in life? And something that was alluded, again, playing devil's advocate. One is in a PhD, I know this is not going to be a favorable like comment, but one is in a PhD program for overall training as a scientist, not extracurricular activities. With that said, it does play a great role in your whole development. And so that's why it's very important. Don't let these outreach or extracurricular activities prevent you from doing your job, because there are times that you get really, really involved in a lot of extracurricular, a lot of outreach, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I have no time to do anything, and then you're miserable. I did that, and don't do it. So make sure to keep in mind and just gauge your capacity to multitask.
Yeah, burnout is real.
Very true.
Don't overstretch yourself. Yeah. But yeah, what Stephen said. Okay. And our very last question for this general, I guess, topic of rotations is, are summer rotations a good idea? If they're even offered by a program. Yeah.
Yes. Highly recommend it. It not only gives you like a heads up and starting into a lab and getting to know a lab, but you also, I don't know, you get dedicated research time without having to deal with courses or seminars or anything. So it's like you're starting fresh without any distractions, and you can get a handle of, I don't know, new techniques, getting to know the lab, getting to know the department, getting to know the school, because you're moving to a new place. I think that I started during the summer. And I think that's one of the best decisions ever. Like, yes, we all want to take a vacation prior to grad school, because you might not have that much time to go out, but or that much time to go on vacation. But I would highly recommend it, especially for those who feel a little bit uneasy of moving to a new place. It's great to start a program or your PhD career with a peer group, right? A group of people that you already know that are already working there.
So I think it's also a very individual decision. I think there are certainly pros that Stephen really mentioned well. I think the way I chose was the worst of both worlds. I continued working in my senior thesis lab until the week before I moved to grad school, and I moved the day before coursework started here. So I think that something I want to echo and really emphasize is that moving somewhere a good amount of time before you start is really good. Because my bed wasn't even built. I had a mattress on the floor when I was starting classes and my rotation, and I'd come home and be like, I need to build a bed. And it was really hard. So even if you don't do a summer rotation, I definitely encourage moving somewhere a little bit before you have to start, if you can. And for me, I did need an intellectual break that I didn't take. Some people, I think, don't need that so much. So it's really a personal choice, but hopefully we can inform you as to what you are choosing, right?
I have a more neutral answer. First off, the first 2 points were great. I wanted to do a summer rotation, and then I realized it doesn't matter. And the reason I'm saying that is because in my program, all our courses are condensed for the fall semester, and we are not allowed to take rotations during that time. We take rotations either the summer before or the winter/spring terms that follow right after. So we can just focus on rotations and not struggle with rotations and classes at the same time. So for my scenario, it didn't really matter, but I would absolutely do it if I wasn't in that program. But if you don't do it, it's not a big deal. I feel like I would say that, but some time off between whatever you're doing now and the start of grad school is definitely, it's going to be I'm not going to say your last chance to relax, but it's just nice to decompress and, refocus before embarking on this really big journey of yours.
So it's agree with many of the points, but my opinion is the opposite of Stephen's. I also did a summer rotation, but I mean, obviously very personal decision. But one of the things that I thought was that I'll finish faster, which is a stupid reason because you have no control over that. So if you're considering that as a reason for doing a summer rotation, it's probably not a good reason. And I wish I had taken some more time to like, I don't know, get away from science a bit before starting grad school. And it did not help me go faster. But definitely moving there, the bit of like time to get settled, I think is a very good idea, especially if you're moving from far away, and getting to know your cohort is a really important part of first year before you all disappear into your labs in the later years.
Definitely, yeah. Great points, well made. So yeah, I also really just generally agree that I think that with this question, it's a more of a personal choice. Yeah. Okay. So our second general topic, there are no questions for this topic, and it's really for, all our panelists here to just comment and, tell us about your social life in and out of lab. So what was that like? And yeah, what would you change or not change?
So I'm really passionate about maintaining a work-life balance for real always. I think at my core, I've come to the conclusion that if it takes me 6 months longer, a year longer to get my PhD because I chose to have a social life, that's 6 months longer that I was happy versus maybe, 4 years where I was really stressed and unhappy because I chose not to, and I chose to be in lab late. And I'd rather be happy while I'm here than sacrifice that. So if it's not a pandemic, I go to a lot of concerts. I like traveling and hiking with my friends. I don't work exactly a 9 to 5, but I'm willing to, cut harsh boundaries on work so I can spend real time with my friends and like de-stressing and just enjoying life. I won't sacrifice my happiness to make my PhD a little bit faster.
I would say my social life is pretty good. Right now it's a little weird because of like COVID and rotations and like being in lab and like shadowing people and being like, should I stay here 9 to 5? Which is like, I guess the most common dilemma rotation students have. But I try to, there's a good saying, like try not to, I'm going to butcher it up, but like try not to conform your life around science, make sure you conform science to your life or something like that. But it's basically what Yael said, like don't sacrifice your own happiness, put some healthy boundaries between yourself. But I'm having a good time. I think many grad students in my program, we go to the park like every other Monday or something, which is nice because as a first year cohort, we don't really see the other grad students, especially during the pandemic. And I think the program directors, every 3 months, we reunite in like their backyard open space and like talk about our rotation experiences and like how our first year is going for us. So there's going to be opportunities to like socialize with your colleagues, even if it's not in like conference rooms or like in the hall or something like that. And yeah.
There's like a lot of evidence suggesting that like the more you work when it gets extreme, you're not actually increasing in productivity at all. So despite that, I was pretty bad at maintaining boundaries during grad school, and it got like really intense at times. Like trying to be better as a postdoc, but it's like not going great. But I am well aware that these excess hours end up often being not so productive, and uh, like also additionally it's often when you like really stop thinking about like the same things over and over that you start to get new perspectives and new ideas that are relevant to your research. So despite the fact that I haven't quite followed these ideas that I've just mentioned, I think it is really, really important for your sanity and productivity. So definitely try and be quite balanced.
I guess for me, I didn't follow the I didn't really have a good work-life balance initially, and I quickly burned out. And I can say that it's not until you realize how not unproductive you are, that's when you actually try to do something and you put those like really strict boundaries between work and your own life, because your work is not your life, right? You need to do something else. And I guess my way out of it is, or that situation was, joining particular groups or societies and just participating in their activities. I guess in my case, it was pre-COVID, so you could actually have activities outside or inside or whatever, so you could all get together. And that really took me away from the stress of being in lab all the time and not having that awful balance. Right now, you really need to learn when to say no and when to accept this day is because it has gone down the drain. Nothing is working. So just take a step back and come the next day, because you're going to be frustrated and you're going to mess it up again. So just give up while you can, and just continue on. And again, like was mentioned by the panelists, like just enjoy the ride. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Enjoy your ride. It's a very stressful amount of years. I don't know, 5+ years, but it's definitely going to be a really enjoyable time for those of you. It's going to be quite a great time. At least it was for me, despite the first couple of years of a rough.
I think one last thing is that something I think about a lot is that at various points in my life, I've sacrificed my work-life balance, and I've told myself it's just for now. It's just until I get into this internship, or until I get into grad school, or now it could be until I get a good postdoc. But I realize that you can do that at every stage forever. And this is the stage where I decided I'm saying, no, I'm not working 80 hours plus a week every week anymore, or else I'll just keep doing that forever. So.
Definitely agree. I think that, if you make it a habit, right, like or make these strict boundaries, then you're going to follow through, or you can't just keep on making excuses for yourself and just keep on working those long hours. And I want to end this segment of the webinar with, I think one of the things that actually one of the co-founders of Scientific Latino told me was like, telling me during my first year of grad school, he told me, to remember that science does not define you, that you have an identity outside of it. So yeah, I think this is really important to remember. Okay, so our third segment is mentorship. That's what we're all here for. This is GSMI, this is CL after all. So, okay, first question in this part of the webinar. How do you identify allies in your community?
It was a hard question, to be honest. I would say, a side goal for my first year was to find as many mentors as possible. I already knew who my PhD advisor was going to be, but the reality is that no matter how good a mentor can be, they're not going to provide you 100% of like what you want. Sometimes they can provide 90 or like 70. And that other part that they can't give you, it's more than likely that someone else can. So I tried to identify what my main mentors could not provide me and see if I already knew someone who kind of indicated to me throughout conversations or through like past interactions that they could provide me those things. And I can give more specific examples, but if any of the other panelists want to jump in.
I think I'm just loud about the things that I'm passionate about. And by being very outspoken about the things that matter to me, I tend to get reactions that are either disagreement or allyship. And so my very extroverted personality tends to polarize people one way or the other. And I figure out there who is an ally.
I guess for me, I feel the same way. Like you do express your feelings, your passions, and you will find those that will resonate with you and others that won't. And that's how life is, regardless. With regards to mentors, like Jessica's approach, like you sometimes want to find multiple mentors, and they'll be mentors in different ways, either technical or not technical, or just life in general. Like I know, and just to clarify, your PI doesn't necessarily need to be your mentor. It doesn't always work out, but they are there for guidance. And I guess for me, to find my community and feel like I'm part of the community, what I did is just find out if there are any sort of like student body and student affiliation groups or societies in the institution that you're at, like SACNA, Boucher, STEM Out, etc. All these groups are phenomenal for you to have a work-life balance. I thanks to them, I found my group and I was able to pull myself out of that dark hole. And they can also serve as your own allies. They all go through the same experience. They're all grad students. We're all going through the same, I don't know, PhD or master's or graduate or professional degree experience. So you can find allies in your peers. You can find allies in your faculty, or even people that are not faculty. Like I had mentors all over the place. So just keep that in mind, and not your PI doesn't have to be your only mentor and your only ally. There are definitely a lot out there.
So like I primarily took like two approaches. One was kind of like outside the lab. So like getting involved in like organizations where kind of everyone starting out in like first year is looking to build some kind of community. So if I'm like, for me, it was getting involved in like high school and undergrad outreach. And then I was immediately being connected with people also in like grad school and postdocs interested in the same thing. So that helped build a little bit of a community of allyship outside of the lab. And then within the lab, started to try and get more comfortable with not knowing what I was doing, so that if I know that I need to do this new type of assay or look at this new type of cell that I don't have experience with, I would just wander into the lab, like Google like this cell type and UCSF, and then walk into the lab of the people that seems to be the best at that and bother them a little bit. Sometimes it doesn't go well, and that's okay. They're probably not going to remember that some annoying first year that seems clueless didn't know what was going on. But through doing that, I also was able to meet like many people that were extremely helpful throughout graduate school. And it was definitely scary for me at first because I'm generally pretty introverted. But I also realized that it's just like impossible to know everything. And many scientists like to help other scientists and have been in that situation. And everyone's like, and then further along, then you'll be able to do the same thing for other people. And that's like also extremely rewarding. Anyway, those were my two approaches that seem to work relatively well.
Thank you all for sharing. And I also want to say that CL is filled with people, mentors, scholars, who are all of your allies as well. And I just want to say, like, you know, the entire team really helped me, you know, my first year, you know, everyone on the CL team. And so like what Kamir said, right, like we know what you've been through or going through. And so we just want to help each other out. So yeah, okay. And so with our next question, what are the best ways to deal with the more, I guess, closed-minded classmates or cohort mates who believe I am just a token to the program, not to be confused with the imposter syndrome?
Okay. Yeah, this is again a hard question, and a lot of us will definitely feel this and go through this. I can say that when I initiated my graduate program, I went from all Spanish. My first language is Spanish, all Spanish to English, and obviously my training was all in Spanish, so it took me a while, and I would get mocked by my accent because I would pronounce things a little bit differently. So my approach was, it did hurt me, I have to admit, but what I can say is if you ever encounter a close-minded person that is trying to demean you or make you feel like you're less than them or they feel superior, there are multiple ways you can approach that. There's the confront them situation. It can or cannot go well. My approach was, you know what? I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to do my work. I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to prove that I'm just as worth being here. I'm just as good as a grad student as you are. And that was my approach. There are multiple other ways that you can approach someone and engaging with you like that. And to be honest, like there are programs in departments, just so we're all aware, there are programs and ombuds and different resources in every university that you can report this type of behavior. And it can be anonymous. It can be you personally go there and talk to people. So there are definitely resources so you don't have to struggle with this situation by yourself. And it's not only going to be classmates. There are going to be professors, so faculty members or administrative folks that might potentially feel the same way. So you got to pick and choose your battles at times, unfortunately.
Yeah, so in my experience, I mean, it's gonna happen, I feel, in some variation. The way that I dealt with it is that I told the person, well, we're all here in the same program. Like, why does it matter at this point? And then I told the PI whose lab I plan on joining. And that conversation was extremely nerve-wracking because I knew I wanted to talk to someone about it. And I did eventually, and the conversation went really well. And I felt absolutely supported, at least on the interpersonal level, which is the sign that I know I picked a good ally. In terms of like dealing in the future, I mean, I'm still trying to come up with like a way to, like, I don't really know what I would do if I were in that situation again. Probably not so much different from what I did previously. But I would kind of just stick to what I said before. Like we're in the same program, you know, our applications were reviewed by the same people and we're still here. So I just leave it at that. Or you can ask them to elaborate why and kind of like make them look like fools of themselves, but you know, pick your battles.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I feel like this is, I mean, clearly very difficult, but like I really like what Yessica said, just like clearly in the same place based on the same metrics. But then also, I don't think it's worth expending a large amount of energy worrying about someone like that, at least at this stage of your career, maybe like a little bit, but not so significant that it takes away from you leading to the training that will ultimately put you in a position where you can start to try and change the environment such that these things don't happen as much through things like Científico Latino and more. Ultimately, this is still a really important training stage, and I wouldn't want to like spend so much mental energy and anxiety in trying to directly confront someone with such an incorrect, bigoted opinion, as opposed to focusing on advancing yourself and just making sure they realize that it's like the exact same circumstances that led you here. It can be a lot more complicated if it's like a faculty member or something like that, in which case then I think the like university resources like Stephen mentioned are then become important and are there specifically to like protect you from things like that.
Yeah. All very valid points, great points. And I also want to, before we head on to the last segment, just also mention that, you know, if there are people like people in your cohort who think that, you know, you are being tokenized, it's very clear who's the one, right, that needs the work, right, who needs to reevaluate, right, like, you know, their thoughts, their values. And so like what everyone has said, all the panelists, like, you know, don't expend too much energy. Think about these people, right, and how to like earn their respect or thinking you're worthy. So yeah, you know, there are some battles that you gotta fight, but some you just don't. You can just leave alone because it's just not worth fighting for. Yeah.
I think one last thought along the lines of not worth fighting for is that if it's my peer, I tend to play it off with humor. If someone says to me, you know, do you think you would have gotten in if not for X, Y, and Z? I'm like, hey, who knows? They let me in. I'm gonna come out with a PhD at the end of this from here. So does it matter? And I'll just play it off. And it is a bigger deal than that. But in the spirit of not spending your energy fighting with this person, that's what I usually do.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you everyone for sharing their stories and experiences. Okay, last segment before the Q&A session is finances and financial support. Okay, so I guess this is more of a phrase. What was everyone's, you know, financial transition like into graduate school in terms of managing and saving money? Because we all know we don't make too much money as grad students. So yeah, anyone want to start?
It was okay on my end. I mean, it wasn't like the greatest, but I had some money saved because I knew, you know, I would have to like move or something like that. When I first started the program, I believe I don't remember because like, you know, the latter half of 2020 kind of just blurs a little bit. But I believe we were all offered like a $1,500 like moving thing. I don't think it was under that name because they have different names. But I believe most of my colleagues who started their first year were offered some sort of like moving stipend to like in case they need to move across the country and stuff. It does take a little bit to adjust. And I'm saying that based off like my friends' experiences. As of my own, I had a research assistant salary, which was kind of the same as the grad student salary. So I was kind of used to how much money I was earning and I already had a budget in place. But yeah, that's my experience.
I think it's really important as soon as possible to, well, like think about investing even a small amount of money, like repeatedly, probably into the stock market, and like saving up for the future. Grad students can now contribute to Roth IRAs, which gives you tax-free gains when you eventually retire, which seems like a very long time away. But through the power of compound interest, the sooner you start contributing, the more that grows. And we definitely don't make that much as grad students. But if you can get into the habit of putting some into a Roth IRA, like the max contribution per year is like 6,000 or something like that. I think it's just really, really important. And with this type of career, it's kind of annoying that we get paid so little for an indeterminate amount of time. So just do a Roth IRA, or at least look into it.
Really quickly, if you guys don't know about these apps already, like Wealthfront, M1, they're all accounts where you can start a Roth IRA. So yeah, just if y'all don't have one already, just please look into it. Because everything that Kamir said, I only learned about it, at the beginning of this year, and I'm very grateful to like my friends who really, brought this up to like light for me. So yeah, start looking into like investments and things like that.
Yeah, I think my contribution bridges what Yessica said and what Kamir said. In undergrad, I didn't take time between undergrad and grad school. I had no money, like really, really no money. I did get a relocation stipend to move, and I moved to Boston, but that wasn't actually, it was well intentioned, but it wasn't actually super helpful because I had to sign a lease in like May or June. And in Boston, you have to pay a broker fee, which is so much money. It was like I had to pay 3 months rent, which here was like $3,600 up front to move into an apartment, which was unfathomable to me. And I asked Harvard, can I have the money up front? And they're like, no, you can have it in September. You can have your $1,500 in September. And I was like, really? That seems not fair to people who might not have that money. I like asked my other classmates, what were they doing? And they're like, oh, I just asked my parents. And I was like, oh, that's nice. Huh. So I worked as a bartender, and I worked as a bartender until the day before I moved to grad school because I had to get enough money to pay my broker fee and move. But then there was a big shift because then I came to grad school, and this is more money than I've ever seen in my life. I understand it is not objectively that much in terms of careers you might have at this stage, but this is where the transition into what Kamir said about a Roth IRA is really applicable because I am making more money than I'm used to. I don't have dependents. I'm really lucky that I finance only myself. And with the amount of money I get paid as a stipend, I live in like a cheap apartment for the area. And I have enough to start putting away and thinking about in the future. So I guess my summary is that my grad school stipend is plenty. The transition to grad school was pretty hard for me, not having money at first and not taking any time to tech. But now I'm really comfortable and really happy.
I guess I would like to echo, like, try to invest or save. One thing to keep in mind, I'm not sure if all of your programs was the same, at least mine, you're not paid your first year. I mean, Jesus, that would be horrible. Your first month. So you have to have that buffer for that first month. And so you need to save a little bit to be able to survive that month. And not survive on ramen like I did, because I didn't plan appropriately because I was very poorly prepared to move. Another thing that I would say, it's like we all talked about investment and whatnot, but even for those who this is your first time living by yourself out there, or actually earning money and paying for yourself, just start a spreadsheet and take into account how much you're spending. Just do a budget. Like I do that every month, and sometimes scream and cry because I overspent for so much. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do? I shouldn't have bought that Roomba, or something like that. But yeah, I think budgeting is smart, and also investment is smart, or even just putting on a savings account. That's fine too. That's fine too.
Thank you guys for sharing. And this second question is more geared for, I guess, the later years of grad school. It's when should you start looking and applying for external funding opportunities, that including fellowships, supplements, and travel grants?
Based off what older grad students have told me, they told me to look now.
Now,
and like as soon as I started looking in my post-bac year, I applied to the NSF because I wanted to maximize the chances that I could apply to, and because I've never written anything like that, and I just wanted to practice. You should definitely start looking at them now, and I saw a couple of thumbs up from other people, so they're probably gonna agree. It never hurts to start early, and I've actually heard grad students find these opportunities and then find out that they can't apply, or they can, but they only have like a couple months left, and they are already so like up to their necks in like work and they can't do it.
Like Yessica said, a lot of these have like restrictions on like, or at least the fellowships rather, have restrictions on when you can apply, like your first 2 years of grad school, or some awards are for like the end of your PhD, or then even when you're transitioning into a postdoc, many like foundation postdoc grants are you're only eligible before you've completed like 16 or 18 months of a postdoc. Mm-hmm. So the better you know how many things you're eligible for and like the big ones, and you can prepare for them, that's going to be better for like the big fellowships. And sometimes you can repurpose them multiple times to send them to multiple places, especially the private foundation ones can be a lot smaller. The grants can be a lot smaller, whereas some of like the NIH grants are enormous and are horrible to put together. So if you can, like, you can set up like a line of private foundation grants. This is like a little more for like when you're finishing your PhD and going into postdoc. There's like about like 8 that you can apply for over the course of like 16 months, and it can be almost the same one, and you can like slightly refine it as you're going and hopefully get one of them. That's like really down the line. But then here you put travel grants, and I only just found out about these. Apparently, like people don't really apply for them very much to go. So this was like if you're a conference, like for me, it'd be like the American Association of Immunology. Every year, huge conference, just like apply every year for a travel grant. And if you get it, it's a line on your CV, and people love to give money to people who have gotten money in the past, even if it's like a travel grant. So anything you can get, apply for it, especially if you're continuing and planning to continue in academia. But I can also say that like in the Bay Area, a lot of my classmates intended to go into industry immediately and just didn't really bother applying for many fellowships because it wasn't really as required. Just another perspective.
Great points. Stephen, Neil, if you guys want to.
I guess they actually, I agree with what they've mentioned, and there are multiple fellowships out there that you can apply to. There are internal fellowships and supplements and travel grants from your institution. There are external ones like the Hertz, Ford, NSF, NIH, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to be honest, you don't lose anything by trying. Just apply. If you really want something, just keep applying. Eventually you will land something. But like it was alluded to, or it was mentioned that some of these grants, you have a limited amount of time for you to apply. So there's some restrictions that you need to be aware of, and there's some very strict rules that you have to follow when submitting or applying to these fellowships. And also read the all the instructions of what the fellowship entails. Some entail internships, and not every PI is down for internships. So make sure you know all the little details as well, other than, oh, I'm getting this amount of money for your education or training.
Yeah, I think there's only like 2 small things I would add and agree with everything everyone has said. One is that if you are an international student, there are many fewer opportunities and it can be more difficult, and you should not stress about this. Like if you're joining a lab, your PI should be able to support you, and there are opportunities for you. They are much harder to get, and it's not really an equitable system at all, but you shouldn't stress about this. When a PI takes you as a student, they understand what they're signing up for. So don't worry about that too much. Like seek out any opportunities that are available to you, but they are more limited, and that is unfortunate. The other is that kind of from the get-go, again, this theme of directness, I always address with every PI I rotated with what their expectations were for people applying for fellowships and grants. Because like on the one hand, I wanted to, right? I wanted to undergo the experience to apply for funding, but like some PIs have favorite fellowships. They only want their students to apply for NRSA. They don't like the NSF. that's just an interesting thing to learn from the get-go. So I would always kind of talk about that with a PI. Hey, what fellowships do people in your lab usually apply to? What is your vision for what you would like me to apply to? Should I join? Or is it okay? Will you support my application for this other kind of weird one, right? So I just addressed it really early. So I started looking early, but I also addressed with the PI kind of what they were thinking.
Great points. Yeah, I also want to mention that if for those of you who are not in our GSMI community, and we've pretty much, I guess, mentioned it over and over, time and time again, we have a fellowship database. And so if you don't know where to start, our website is like a perfect place to start. And it's also filtered by citizenship status. So what Yael has mentioned about, if you are an immigrant or not, if you're a DACA recipient or not, you can also put this in the filter, and then a bunch of fellowships are going to pop up based on that, right? I guess criterion. Yeah.
I just remembered one thing to add, like related to supplements. If your PI has an eligible NIH grant and you fall under the categorization of an underrepresented minority in STEM, then you may be eligible for a diversity supplement, which, and I'm really surprised to learn that many PIs at my PhD institution did not take advantage of this, where they had eligible trainees, eligible grants, and just didn't take the energy to apply. So definitely, if you're eligible, check if your PI has an eligible grant, and maybe you might need to write it for them. Maybe they'll write it like with you, or anyway, it can be a really easy source of funding. They are generally easier to get, apparently.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yes, diversity supplement. Yeah, okay. So in the interest of time, we're just gonna go straight into the general Q&A session. We've incorporated two, I guess, pre-made questions, but I see there's this thing keep on popping up, and I see that we have some questions in the Q&A panel, so I want to take this time to address your questions live. Okay.
There's a couple questions in the chat too. Make sure to ask your questions in the Q&A, not the chat. That way we don't lose track of them. But I'm trying to scroll up and find the first one so we don't forget about it.
Yeah, there's one from 6:21. Yeah,
sorry?
There's one from 6:21 p.m. About rotations.
Yeah, there's one. Wait, I can't find it now. Oh wait, I found it. Okay. Could the average student succeed in a PhD program? I am coming from a country where research experience is hard to come by because we don't have the resources to carry out research. Would it affect me adversely in the PhD program? I mean, if you're in the program, then you can definitely succeed. But if you're gearing up to apply, typically programs recommend at least 1 year of research experience. I mean, I would say that it definitely helps. If you don't have any whatsoever, it can definitely be a little bit more difficult. And there's a lot of discourse around that because people generally believe PhD programs should be training programs, not programs where they expect you to know everything right away. But that's another topic for a different time. But I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in.
I think people have found that like the strongest predictor of success in a PhD program, I mean, it's kind of hard to define what success is in a PhD program, but generally is having research experience. And the reason for that, rather than like GPA or like GRE test scores or whatever. And the reason for that is because you're used to what research is actually like, which isn't like normal school, and is full of constant failure, which is, I think, what another question was about. So when you're like ready for the mental strenuousness of like that, I don't think it necessarily, like, there's this perception of like scientists being like always smart, and I don't necessarily think that is like crucial. It's just like, it's a job like any other, and you just need to learn a lot, and anyone can learn it. So I think you can totally succeed in a PhD program. Like you just need to put in the time and realize what research is actually like, because actually doing it is a little different than what you might expect before you get research experience. So I think definitely you can succeed.
I totally agree. Like, there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to succeed. If you're concerned of having experience with research, you can always try. I'm not sure how it works where you're from, but you can always try to apply for internships and see if you can get an internship, and that way you get some research experience for, I don't know, the summer or winter. Another thing that has worked, and I guess that has been working now due to COVID and social distancing, is like remote research. Like all those students that were going to have internships this summer, they obviously they couldn't go to their hosting institution, so they decided to, or the labs or PIs decided to do more of a virtual approach to it, in which, yes, you can't do the technical hands-on experience, but you can definitely do more of literature-based or mathematical modeling or all these other type of approaches, or I guess types of experiments that do not rely on you being at the bench, right? So there are multiple alternatives out there for you to get some sort of research experience. I don't think it's frowned upon to not have research, but it does definitely benefit you during your application, because it does show your commitment and does show that you have experience, and it does show that you can survive 2 months doing research if you have an internship. And like Kamir, like he mentioned, like like if you have experience, you know what failure is, and you know what research is mostly failures, and there are one or two like great moments like that last like 5 seconds, and that's your highlight for the rest of your career, unfortunately.
Yeah, I just also want to really quickly mention, I also, what the question that Kamir is referring to is about experiencing stress when an experiment keeps on failing. And I'm only a second year, as you know, as Yale is as well. And so, but you know, I'm also troubleshooting a lot of things, and I've come to like learn. I also hear a lot from other grad students that rejections are going to be the norm. Failures is also normal. And so, and what Kamir says, you know, be resilient, just keep trying. PhD is not always about being smart, right? It's hard work. It's a lot of resilience. And so one of the co-founders of CL also told me, and I don't know too much about the ratio, but I remember him saying like a PhD is really like maybe 5%, 10% intelligence, and like 90-95% hard work and resilience, and keep going at it. So yeah, that's what the PhD, I think, life is. It's trucking it through and persevering. Yeah.
There was another question in the chat that before it gets buried. You can't see it, right, Daisy? Or okay, sorry.
Guys. When I'm sharing my screen, yeah.
What would we recommend to students with learning disabilities or mental health issues? How should we find support? When/if should we disclose this to a mentor, etc.? Pretty important topic. Does anyone want to go?
Steven, yeah.
Okay, I guess with regards to that, you don't have to disclose it if you don't feel comfortable disclosing. No one needs to. You don't exactly. So if you're comfortable with disclosing it, then that's fine. If you're not, it's you don't have to, right? With regards to other types of support, again, most institutions have dedicated administrative personnel that are in charge of these types of cases, in which they are in charge of making sure that every student or every trainee has a fair chance at the program, right? Or can adapt to your needs. I'm not sure if that's every program, but I know that most programs that I'm familiar with, they do have that type of resources. And that's literally what I can say. Like, you might have there might be some situations where you can't find the resources or you can't find the support, but there's always external, like for instance, like student health. Every institution has student health, so you can go there. There's some, if you require some psychologists or psychology services, there's always a psychologist, a staff psychologist in every institution. If you require any other type of resources, like, I don't know, physical therapy or speech, you have any speech impediments, there's also staff members for that. And I think most institutions, I think legally, are required to provide these types of help to all those who attend the institution. So I don't think you would have much of an issue. I think the biggest issue here for me from that question that I see is disclosing it. And in my case, is like for me, my personal thought about is like, it's none of your business kind of thing. It's like, I can disclose it if I want to, but if I'm not comfortable with it, I won't.
So I agree with everything that's been said. I chose to disclose things up front because I did not want to work for a PI that wasn't accommodating and kind about these things.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a risky choice, and many people do not make that choice.
Anyone else want to chime in? Yeah, I agree with what everyone has said so far. Disabilities can be visible or not. And I want to say that this didn't happen to me, but there is a rotation student who rotated in my lab, and she has a stutter, and so it wasn't I guess like audible, it wasn't recognizable until she's very nervous. And so at the beginning of, I remember her practice rotation talk and her actual rotation talk, she always first and foremost discloses, hey, like I have a stutter, but by addressing it up front at the beginning of the talk, it sort of helps her. And so I think that, yeah, it's what Stephen has said, it's up to you if you want to disclose it or not. But then there are so many groups, organizations at your school, hopefully, right, that where you can also be part of that community to help you, I guess, feel belonging. So there is a project Stutter at Yale, for example, that just began a couple months ago. So, yeah. So in the interest of time, we have a few minutes before we officially end the webinar. And so we perhaps have maybe one more question to fit in. And so I see a question in the Q&A about, this is more along the topic of lab rotations. And so someone has asked, what is a strategy, I guess, for, rotating in a very popular lab? And I guess, any tips for how to approach the PIs and grad students in the more bigger labs, such as ones that are very popular? Yeah.
So I think that in my experience, one thing that was really helpful was from the get-go, acknowledging that, your lab is amazing. I know a lot of people want to rotate with you. I know you only have room for so many students. How do you decide who gets an offer to join your lab? And just like from the beginning, establishing that. And then maybe at the end of your rotation, I mean, this is true of any rotation, no matter how popular the lab is, saying, I really loved your lab. Do you think that you have space for me as a thesis student, should I want to join? And like kind of fleshing that out, like how do you make that choice? When do I have to let you know by? And just again, it just comes with me. I'm very direct. So from the beginning, I say, how do you decide? how many students do you take? And at the end, I say, I love your lab. If I want to join after my next rotation, can I come back and talk to you?
That's an amazing response. Yeah. I think that with the topic of labs being popular now, I think this is not so much a taboo, but something that, you know, a lot of students feel in the cohort, like when we share which labs that we want to rotate in, there's like this unspoken like tension. But yeah, being really upfront is usually the way to go.
And if they let you participate in the group meetings or lit reviews or whatever, I don't know, sometimes lab have like lit reviews or presentation of a paper or journal clubs, do that. Just take that leap. It might be a little bit rough because it's your first time ever with a group, but at least the whole lab will know you because you presented, they saw your face, they saw your presentation, they saw you presenting for at least 30 minutes. So make yourself be heard, make yourself be known, like, hey, look at me, I want to be part of here, I like it. And also interact a lot with the grad students. Don't just be a fly on a wall, and talk to the PIs as well. And like Yale, she mentioned, make sure that they know that you're interested, and don't just assume that they know that you're interested, because you might get surprised and they think, oh, we didn't think that we thought that you weren't interested because you never said anything, you were always quiet. It's like, well, I just didn't want to make a fool out of myself. Something like that, right? Just make sure, be clear, be direct, and yeah, make sure that the spotlight's on you.
So I think I'm just gonna wrap it up. I see that there are a lot of questions addressed to some panelists, and so if you guys are comfortable sharing your social media, I guess, handles, your Twitter, you know, or emails, please feel free to also include them in the chat box so our attendees or participants will know where to contact you. But yeah, thank you guys so much for being panelists in our very last 2020 GSMI webinar on things to expect in graduate school. Thank you to everyone in this current Zoom room and on the YouTube side for tuning in. And so yeah, I think this is the last of it, the end. And so if you are a GSMI scholar and you know you're off to wherever you're going to in the fall, we hope to have you again, this time as GSMI mentors, and applications will be released for serving as a GSMI mentors, hopefully mid-May, if not, then early June. So yeah, thank you guys so much. And wherever you guys are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you guys, all the panelists. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.